the fact that like somebody lived 200, 500, 600 years ago, however long ago, wrote things down, I've read and have been a better person because of it. That was the only way they had to communicate to me through the generations. I have written word, I have audio, I have video, and we're evolving more technologies. Like I have my health data. At some point, I'll be able to tell a story with like the data that I have around me and be able to map a story around that I couldn't have. Maybe 10 years from now I'll be able to do that I couldn't have today. That that will affect people in the future. Maybe my grandchildren, maybe people I don't even know. And that's the level that I think is really interesting, is that if they had these mediums to communicate with the future, what would they say?
I will run, I will rise, I will grow like the world's never known.
So this week I'm talking with Matt Murray. Him and I used to work together, and so we actually went to college together. It's been, I think, 8 years since I've talked to him, but he's someone like myself. In my day job, I live between design and development as a research engineer or a design technologist. So we kind of talked through a little bit of that, kind of where he's been since I've last seen him. He reached out to me and was just like, hey, how do you go from being an iOS developer to producing content in magazines and vlogs? And so we sat down to have a conversation and uncovered that he actually left Mormonism as well. I did several years ago. I actually wrote about it in volume 32. That was the first time that I had kind of published anything or spoken publicly about leaving Mormonism, but really religion in general. And I kind of just like lay out my whole story and the details of it. And so sat down with Matt, uncovered that there's a lot of similarities between him and I. But I will say, anybody who's still practicing the LDS religion, we get into the details, and it may not be something that you're ready to hear. And I just want to be very upfront and respectful with people's beliefs. I believe that all religions are a different framework for looking at the world. And if it works for you, if you find the one that works for you, then that's great. It wasn't something that worked for me, but I don't want to discredit or put down or disrespect anyone else for what they believe. I genuinely think there's no single path. So if you find something that works for you, keep going. And I just say that up front because we kind of get into the depths of why I left, why he left, and details that you don't talk about a lot when I was still practicing the religion. So it gets heavy. We also talked about therapy and some of the stuff that I'm going through. And it was honestly really hard to put this out, but it's also just a part of like me uncovering like this is who I am. I'm a lot more raw than people would like to think. So yeah, here it is, and I hope you enjoy it.
It's been so long. I feel like there's a lot to catch up on.
I know. I'm happy you reached out, dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Dude,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I miss working with you. I'll say that to start off. That was one of I think the coolest relationships with another developer. I think that we were able to build, and because we worked pretty well together. Like we thought similarly, we could gripe about the same stuff.
Yeah.
So that was a cool partnership.
I think one of the key things is like the reason I think you and I get along. I think our personalities match really well, but also we were in a time when there wasn't a lot of other people. Like you and I both live in design and development. Like we crossed the boundary between that, and there's not a lot of people that are able to do that kind of blend the two worlds. And so I think that's where we kind of like really came together, is we both enjoyed the developing, but then we had this foot in the design side. And I don't know, are you a design background?
Yeah, actually, informally, it was a year of college I spent because I wanted to be a graphic designer. And
That's yep.
really, yeah, you too. Until I
I didn't
realized,
have any
like,
background. It was just stuff that
oh,
I did
really?
on the side. Yeah, but I
So,
always
I
wanted to
mean,
be a graphic designer.
yeah, I was a graphic designer first before I was a developer. It wasn't until I realized, hey, other people are way better than me at this. And two, like, you kind of don't make as much money. Uh,
Yeah,
you can. I know some developers that definitely make as much money, but I think you have to work a little harder at it to get to the level where you're making good money. And so it was around that time in college when I discovered programming, and I was like, hey, I'm going to make the switch. But it was always in my back pocket. Like, I had that eye for design, I had that eye for color, that type of
yeah, that's definitely where we mesh. I didn't take any formal classes, but I've always done a lot of stuff on the. I mean, I've been doing photography since I was in high school, so it's like,
There
you
you go.
know, that and then I got into Photoshop in 8th grade, was the first intro into anything. Actually, one of the videos I put out, I showed my work. I came across it in like boxes that my parents gave me, and
Yeah.
it was like the original art that I had done in 8th grade, and I showed like that in comparison to like the magazines and you know, some of the prints and stuff that I've been doing today.
Yeah.
And it's really funny to look. There's a
Yeah.
lot of similarities, but there's also like, I'm obviously a lot better than I was back then. But I've never had, high school was the only training that I had. I went into college, and 3 weeks in, found out that we were pregnant, and so immediately I was the same thing where I was like, I was originally an architect major, and then
I did not know
I was
that.
like, well, I really like the design side of it. Like, that's cool. And like the 3D renderings, like that'd be fun. But the moment that I was like, I have to provide, like I had no idea what I wanted to do. And within 3 weeks, I had mapped out how I could graduate with a technical degree in 3 years. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was like, I turned everything around. It was exactly like you were saying. It was like, I really wanted to do graphic design,
Mm-hmm.
but it was, I didn't think you'd be able to get, I could get paid as much. And everyone's like, oh, it's super competitive, and like everything's competitive. Like, looking back, I'm like, that was a stupid thing. But in my mind, I'm like, oh, well, they're good and I'm just me. I'll do technical because that's like better to, you know, my dad was always like, do technical. But just like you said, like, I never stopped. Like, it was always in the back. I was always doing stuff
Yeah.
on the side. It's part of how I breathe, is like,
Yeah.
design is how I think. So I think that's where you
So,
and I, like,
yes.
we kind of mesh.
Yes. Yeah. And I will say one thing about it being competitive. Like, I think everything's competitive. You just have to decide what you want to be competitive at, where
Yeah.
your strengths are. But yeah, design has always been in the back pocket. And I remember having discussions about that. Like, a lot of people didn't think the way we thought. And it was more about putting out fires. Do you remember this conversation? It was
Yeah, for sure.
because everyone was, you know, something would go wrong, or we needed a product, we needed a new feature, and it was like, how quickly could you get it done? And those were the heroes.
Yeah.
And if you were like, hey, wait a minute, let's think about design, let's do this, let's do it right, let's make it beautiful, people just kind of looked at you funny.
Yeah.
You were kind of in the way almost. You kind of got in the way because you were slowing things down. I
Yeah.
felt that way sometimes. But we always
Yeah.
had.
That culture has definitely shifted a lot. But yeah, and I think like in the industry as well, like, I think that there's more of an evolution between the relationship between designers and developers. I think
Mhm.
generally I think there's better conversation around it than there was back, because when we were working, it was like the start of mobile. You know, it was like, you know, back when like, it wasn't the industry that it is now. So it's
Yeah,
definitely evolved everything.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were there on the ground floor. I mean, they released it in what 2009, and we were there in 2000. Or, I mean, I'm saying Apple released their iOS
The
developer
SDK. Yeah.
SDKs, and we were there in 2010, and you
Yeah.
already had. I was gonna they already had Deposit Mobile, and they'd already had like this app going, which was so yeah, we were there early, man. So we got to, which is cool. It's so different than it is now. I feel
What do
like
you do now? I don't even
back then.
know what you do now. You still developing? You designing?
Yeah, so I'm a developer. Unfortunately, the only design I get to do nowadays is when the web team asks me for help with HTML because they don't know HTML. So they're like, "Hey, how do you do this?" And I squeeze some design in there. But I don't get to design in my own job, unfortunately. I work at this company called Nativo, and we are an ad tech company. So advertising technology. So I still iOS, but we're kind of like the pipes between publishers and advertisers. And so advertisers want, digital spaces where they can advertise their products, and we're kind of those pipelines for those advertisers so they can connect with publishers. So we're the technology that does that.
How long have you been there?
I've been there 6 years.
Okay.
6 years, man. So it's been the only place I've worked here. It kind of became like I got the job, and again, it was fresh. It wasn't like I was inheriting somebody else's code. Well, I did, but they were contracted, so I basically had liberty to just rewrite everything, and it became my like baby. It's like my child. There was only 34 people in the company. I was the only iOS developer, so big change coming from where it was like there was 50 iOS developers. And so here, this was my child, and I haven't been able to leave. Like, I just feel like I'd be abandoning my baby. You know what I mean?
Do you still enjoy it?
I do. Every day is a different challenge. We're working with a very smart engineering team, a product team. It still feels very like it's a small startup. We just went through we just went through a round of layoffs, which was kind of scary. So now our company is even smaller than it was in the past. So it still has that startup feel where we're hustling to get deals with publishers, and now the mobile team's a little bit bigger. It used to be I was iOS and Android. Now I'm just iOS. So, but it's a tight ownership, and it's fun. There's problems we're still solving. Apple, you've been following with iOS 14. I mean, and for the last 5 years or so, Apple's really been clamping down on privacy, and that hurts advertisers because advertisers want to know a little bit about you, and Apple's like, "Nah, you don't. Though we don't want you to know anything." And so it's like, well, how do we solve this problem? So we're trying to work with Apple. We're trying to create workarounds. So, the landscape's still evolving, and it's an interesting place to be. So,
yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. And you're out in LA, right?
I'm out in LA.
Oh, man.
Close to Venice,
That's cool.
Marina Del Rey.
I went out, that's, I think where we connected again. And so I was out in LA, and you were like, "Dude, I'm out here." And I was like, "Man, I wish I would have known. I would have gone and visited you."
I know.
This was like a year ago. I totally forgot that you went out to LA.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I missed that opportunity. But LA's pretty cool. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I love it. It's a very interesting vibe. I've been to San Francisco. I've been to Portland. There's a lot more hustle and bustle. LA is interesting. Like the people are just like they're like doing a bunch of stuff. It's not like they're like, but at the same time, there's this culture of like, it'll work out. We'll figure it out. There's not like this high. Yeah, it's not a lot of high stress. At least the little part that I was, the group that I was, working with and chatting with. So
interesting.
It seemed really like a really cool area.
Yeah, I mean, like just one example, like we don't start. Our office doesn't open until 10. So we have. I used to go surfing in the morning. So I used to wake up at like 7:30, go surfing, take a shower, and then come in by 10.
Oh man.
Laid back out here. It's 10 to 7. So, yeah, it's just a little more laid back.
Yeah.
But there's so much happening. There's such a foodie scene here. There's an art and music scene here. Obviously, you have the beaches, the great weather. So it's fun. And then we got Google and Apple moving in.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, Google's building a big campus close by, and so is Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
LA's an interesting place. The people that I was working with, they were talking about how they're like, San Francisco, they have, like that's where like some of the Silicon Valley is where the companies are, but all the rich people and the owners of those companies live in LA. And so there's like,
Really?
LA is like the place that like everybody is at. And I just thought, like, when I was thinking about it and they were like naming all the people, I was like, huh, that is interesting.
Everybody's in LA. Yeah.
LA's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. It has its downsides. It has its dark, seedy underbelly. But it's cool.
So I'm surprised you're still doing iOS development. I mean, interesting.
It's interesting. How so?
Yeah. I'm so far removed from iOS development. And I guess it's interesting too, because like I've talked to Wayne a little bit because he left a while ago. Yeah, he went to a different bank up in Idaho. It was kind of a similar situation where it was like he was like the first developer. Like it was all contract work that they were doing, and this is the first time they were going to do in-house stuff. And so he like architected everything that they were going to do, and was like he was getting away from like he couldn't just do iOS anymore like he had done when we were together. He was doing iOS, the back end. He was doing writing a lot of the I think they were doing Node work, like server side, writing all the services to like build up this core infrastructure to support where they wanted to go. So I think it was a good move. But when I talked to him last, he's gotten really into running and cross country skiing and photography. So he's like, I don't even code after work anymore. I was like, what? That's crazy. He was live and breathe. Yeah. Guy was always coding something.
Yeah, that guy was like a superhero of developers, in my opinion. Just like, how do you do it?
He was definitely underappreciated, so it was good for him to move on. But I kind of evolved out in I really actually like what I do. I live in a place, so in innovation it's like I kind of like live between design and development all the time, because there's never enough developers or designers. And so it's always like, hey, maybe you could just come in and help us while we're waiting for design resources or whatever. Sure. And so I spend more of my time in Illustrator and InDesign than I do in coding anything anymore. I'm so far removed from it that it's a lot of like explaining high levels, like concepts, how the technology works, and then passing it off to like development teams. So it's a really fun environment. That's why I haven't left. I essentially kind of look at it as like my day job is like the VC funding that allows me to do all the other stuff that I do outside of work. So
yeah,
it's a good
like a startup environment.
Yeah, it's still very much like that. It's grown a bunch. a ton since you've left, but
The research
there's
department.
yeah, but I mean, we still pull the same type of like. I'm probably on the best team I've ever been on right now, and it's people that are super technical, but like they get so much more, and they're good at what they do in the development side, but they aren't afraid to like pull me in and be like, hey, more about the design, even though I'm not like a designer.
Yeah.
I don't have like the title, and so like before it used to be titles mattered. I really love how there's like this flexibility and fluidity between like it's more about what you can do than what your title is, which I think I thrive in those kind of environments. So that's why I've been there for so long. I just celebrated 10 years,
Congrats, man. That's awesome.
which was crazy. I never, I
It's
and
weird.
like I thought 5 years for sure I'd be out. But I found something that worked. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard a title that I really liked once. Feel free to adopt it. It's diviner. Have you heard of it?
Diviner? No.
It's developer with designer. So dumb, but it works.
Nah, there's a better term
What's
that
that?
I think fits with the world you live, which is design technologist. And that's like an industry. Yeah, it was like I think 4 or 5 years ago is when I started to see that, because I was like, I don't fit in either one of the roles, and I started like doing some research, like, okay, if I'm gonna look for another job, like, what is that job? And it's actually Amazon that was hiring. That's how I kind of found out they were hiring a design technologist. And when I was reading the description, it's that person that lives in between the two, really, and that does like prototypes, that can understand the technology, but then also relate that to quick experiences that a member would have. And so you're doing member feedback, but you're developing, you're doing comps. Sometimes you're actually getting in and encoding stuff, but it's always to that extent of getting to understand what it is you're building, and then the heavy lifters kind of come in and kind of take it and run. And that's really where I have always felt like I could do my best work.
That's awesome.
Is operate. Yeah, so feel free to look for jobs in that role, design technologist. I've seen a lot more in the industry growing, where they're valuing that skill set, and it's a lot of like research departments, of a lot of that places where it's exploring the new, and you
Yeah,
need to be multifaceted.
exactly.
Actually, to that point, I think that a really interesting area, if I were back in school, I would really be looking at the crossover between fashion and design and technology. I think that area, I think that there's something really interesting where it's like you and me, when we were working with developers, we had this, it was almost this knowledge that they were unaware of because of our design background, and because we thought in this way. I think that same thing is going to happen, where developers are going to be required more when you look at IoT and wearables. I think that there's this space for someone to play that understands the fashion world, understands the design, and understands the technology, and how those kind of come together. That to me feels like a really interesting area. So
Yeah, that's exciting. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, that's great, because I feel like you found a way to move up and advance your career, and still be in love with it at the same time. Because I know for the longest time it was like, okay, if I want to move up, I have to become a manager.
yeah,
And if I become a manager, I kind of lose some of the passion of what I originally started with, right? Because
Yep.
I didn't love computer science because I would get to tell other computer science people what to do. You love it for all these other reasons, like you get hands-on tech, you get to create things. It's a very creative field, people don't realize,
Yeah.
especially when you add design. But I love this whole design technologist.
Yeah.
It sounds like you found another path forward, because the other path forward is, it's hard being an iOS developer too, because you don't get back-end experience. And you need to find a way to add that, because otherwise, well, I like what you've done, because you bypassed the whole, hey, I'm going to get deeper into tech and go into backend. You just sidestepped that whole thing and like, no, you went design route, and that's cool. That's working for you.
Yeah, I knew that was a way to make me hate my life. That's what I learned very quickly. I was interviewing for other jobs, and I was like, I'm never going to get these jobs because I don't want them, because I'm not the Google type that's like hardcore. Like, that's not where I live. That's not my strength. And so I found a way to make my day job enjoyable. And I've really been pursuing this creative work, and that's what helped my day job be okay. Like, the fact that I had my own brand that I could shape and mold, and I could do content that I cared about, do photos and videos, and do design stuff, and put out physical publications. Like, that allowed me, that scratching that itch allowed me to be able to go to my day job and be like, I'm okay with being in a big company where I don't get to make all the decisions. Like, I think this is wrong decision, but at the end of the day, that executive is going to make it, and I'm okay with that, because I get compensated for what I do. Like, I don't run this company, and I don't run my ideas, and being able to have that separation and have a place where I can still be fulfilled outside of work, I think was, and a lot of therapy, to be honest. Like, therapy was, I was in a really, really bad place, because all of that was happening at the same time that I was like, I don't know if you knew, but I left Mormonism. So I just got left.
Talk to you about that, because that was in one of your
left
magazines.
religion. Yeah. So
and
I actually haven't talked about it much.
Really?
Yeah.
It was in one of your magazines. I didn't get your magazine, and I was like, I'd rather just talk to you, but that was years ago.
Yeah, it was volume 32. It was the first time I talked about it, but the magazine was a byproduct of my experience kind of leaving religion in general. But so all of this was like happening at the same time. So there was a lot going on inside of me, and it wasn't like one thing fixed it. It was multiple things that helped kind of heal and evolve and get to a healthier place for myself. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it was a very difficult transition period.
Was that 6 years ago too? Was this all happened around the same time, you said?
Yeah. So it's.
Was there something that like spurred it, or was it something nagging at you for a while, or was there an event? What was it?
Yeah, it was this interesting situation.
I kind of left.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's not something I mean, all my Mormon friends know, but it's not something I publicly express or
Yeah, and it's
weird.
It's hard. Do you still have your family that is still in Mormonism, or?
It was easier for me in one sense, because my dad has never been a member, and then my two brothers left before I did, and they were the main reasons I left. They kind of made me start thinking differently. It was still hard, man. It was hard as hell, and it's still, in a sense, a weird feeling, because you're neither here nor there. Maybe I just haven't felt enough. I don't know. But my brothers definitely paved the way. They're much braver, much more confident than I am. And I think before, my mission, whenever I heard of an atheist, it was always like, oh, well, they don't know. Their eyes aren't open. But then my brothers left. And it was like, wait a minute, they do know. They know everything I know. They were raised the exact same way. They did the exact same things I did. So, like, what's going on? And that's when I kind of started, when you love someone, I love my brothers, and it just kind of made me at least ponder these things that I hadn't given a chance before. Thinking about this is so scary.
Yeah.
when you've been taught otherwise your whole life. You've been taught to avoid it. You've been taught to literally turn a blind eye, to not even think about it, to not anything anti-Mormon, anti-religion. And it's so scary. So I guess I had it easy because of my brothers were a little bit of a trailblazer for me, but it still wasn't easy, and it's been a process.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's never easy because and just like a lot of other religions, it's a part of your life. It's a part of your identity of like who you are, your history of like how you grew up and my whole family is still in the Mormon church, and so that's always very interesting because all of them left. I was the only one that graduated high school and stayed in the church. Everyone else left and then eventually came back. So I was the first one. Yeah. And so it was, it's very interesting where they think that they understand, but I don't know that they do. I've talked to some of my siblings about it, but it's an interesting thing. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like, I'm not kind of like what you're saying is there was this narrative that like, that you are bad and then you get religion and you're good. And then when you leave religion, you're bad. And that narrative just is so unrealistic. I mean, one of the things that I was explaining to one of my friends that, when we were going through the transition, they were like, well, when you leave, you can't just like pick and choose what you want. And I'm like, no, you can. You actually do that when you're still in the religion, any religion you're in. You hear what you want, and then you pick and choose how you're going to live it. You just identify as Mormon, and so you're not no one's arguing with you because you're still like, I'm a part of the group.
Yeah.
But the moment that you leave and you start having to like recreate what matters to you, like of course I'm going to take and keep all of the good things that I learned and then shed all the baggage that caused me a lot of pain and anguish that I didn't need. Like that's just common human action. Like I'm always going to take in the information and determine how to best live my life. And so the concept of people don't realize that they're doing that. They just happen to keep going to church. Like it's the same thing. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I will say though, I don't know if you experienced this, but I think when you start questioning your religion, you realize you start using this part of your brain that maybe you never used before, that critical thinking, because before, the church told you, it kind of had your life planned out for you and had all your morality planned out for you. You didn't get to decide your own morality. Your morality was decided for you. And for a lot of people, that's a source of guilt and shame because someone else is deciding your morality. And when you leave, you kind of have to reshape all that because no one is there telling you, what you need to do, believe, and think. And so you start kind of critically thinking more and maybe you don't drink alcohol, but you decided to not drink alcohol. You know what I mean? Or, maybe you don't smoke marijuana, but it's because it wasn't right for you. You didn't like the way it felt or how it made you feel. And in a way, it's really empowering because you get to create your own sense of how you want to live, what feels good and what feels right for you. You get to experiment.
Yeah.
You get to experiment and really find what makes you, feel the most fulfilled.
Yeah. No, I think that was actually being raised. I'm the youngest of 6. And so I think one of the biggest blessings in my life is the fact that I was the youngest of 6 and that I got to see one after another my brothers and sisters graduate high school and then have to figure out who they wanted to be because mom and dad weren't around. And I've always been a very analytical person. And I think one of my biggest strengths was that I remember I must have been like 11 or 12 and being in a Sunday school, and they're saying, don't hang out with people that do drugs because they'll make you want to do drugs too. I remember thinking about that and going, well, my brothers and sisters do drugs, but I don't think they're saying don't hang out with your family. And they've never tried to get me, like, I took this critical role, and I'm like, well, I just I don't agree. I didn't
Yeah.
tell anybody. I didn't tweet it. It wasn't anything to anyone else, but it was like, that's not how I'm going to live. And
Yeah.
so, like, from an early age, I feel like I lived, even when I was Mormon, like I didn't smoke or drink or do any of that stuff because religion was keeping me. It was because I had already, like, I had decided that from my own interactions with other people that were doing that. Like, so I think that was one thing that I had, is like, it's this confidence very early on that, like, I didn't care. I wasn't swayed by others' opinions. And I don't think a lot of people do that when they're young. And so I think that at whatever age you come to realize that you are an agent that is in control of the experience that you have in life, I think it's really powerful. Like, it's an awakening. And that's part of, like, where it was for me. It was, I was 28, about to be 29. And I was at this moment when, I was looking at my birth certificate, and I found out my dad was 30 when he had me. And there's a lot of these things happening at once, where I was realizing, like, I wasn't happy. Like, I didn't enjoy going to church because I'd try and, like, if you questioned, it was like, just pray, read your scriptures, like, common answers. It wasn't, we're not here to, like, question things. I'm like, well, what about when that doesn't answer it? It's like, well, it'll always answer it. It's like, there wasn't a desire to, like, recognize when things don't go right. And it was, so I had a hard time. I just ended up, and we had, 3 young kids. And so we're in the hall most of the time. And I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't realize that I didn't like it. But it's just going through this moment where my dad was 30 when he had me. I was about to be 29. I didn't have a bad life at all. Like, I had a great job. I had great benefits. I had, 3 wonderful kids.
Yeah.
I was married at the time. I had a house that was really great. Like, from all looks, I would look at it and be like, why am I not happy? Like, why do I? But there was something that I just knew about me that was that there was that. Also, I have to also explain that there was, working in a big company, and especially one that is very, military, and it had the same culture as the church, and seeing the parallels, and the tactics that were used on both, I realized, oh, the church is a company. Like, it is a company. And even though you have executives, you have the 12 apostles are executive level that run different parts of the organization, right? I started to see these two. And then when I went down into innovation, I was reading all these biographies about people doing startups, right? And so I was reading, People Over Profit, things a little bird told me, start something that matters. All these people that had been in a startup, and how it had kind of, like, that whole process. And then I was called to be a seminary teacher, and we were doing Doctrine and Covenants, which was all about the starting the church. And I started to view it as Joseph Smith as the entrepreneur, because when you actually look at it, I was like, oh wait, this wasn't the first company that he started. He tried several companies before, and he carried over some of the practices. Like, I started, and when I was reading the story, I wasn't angry. I just started to view it of, like, oh, and then I'd read Doctrine, right? And then I'd read, in Doctrine and Covenants, there was some of, like, these revelations where I was like, it was this one where he didn't have money, he had a revelation that someone should buy property for him. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. And when you start thinking of it like a startup, like him starting a company, it just had a whole new, because he was like absolutely a very charismatic, like futuristic, a futurist. And I'll give him that. Like, I think, but it was a company just like the other ones that he had started, and it really kind of, I started to see the parallels, and I just wasn't connecting with the culture. It wasn't something. I kind of see it like this. I think religion is frameworks for people to look at that life, to help them handle the information of life. And Mormonism wasn't right for me. It turns out that I don't think any of the frameworks were right for me. It wasn't something that brought me value, that helped. I needed to get out, to kind of continue to evolve in a different way that I was going. And that's kind of hard, especially in Mormonism, because it's so absolute. It's all other churches are an abomination before me is the mentality. It's like, this is the one and only true church. And that's just, for one, I just think that one and only true path for anybody, I think, is wrong. So like, I mean, there's multiple things that kind of went together, but that's why the magazine stems out of, like, I was asking myself, like, I had all these things that were great, but what did I actually chose? You know, like, I chose to go on a mission, and I chose, to marry that person that was great and had 3 kids. Like, those were my choices that I had chosen. And then I started to, like, go, hey, what if I make other choices that help me to get the outcomes that I want? And that's where the evolution happened. Is I always wanted to do like a magazine. And so that concept was the idea that evolved everything else, was shifting everything to be centered around. I think that I will always, like, just love my first magazine, because I think if you go back and read it, you can see, knowing the backstory, you can see the whole thing is my evolution out of religion. When you recognize it, like, the 3 pillars of the magazine are find what you believe, trust in yourself, and live life intentionally. And I feel like that, like, encompassed the moment that I was in, of like, you grow up in this religion. And I was like, well, what is it that I actually believe? Like, I don't know. It's this interesting moment when you believe it for you and not for what anyone else said. And it's not to say that, like, I was just like a blind believer before. Like, a lot of people would be like, oh, you just didn't have a strong enough testimony. I was devout. Like, I was complete in it.
A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people think I was, I was weak, or I'm this lost sheep, that I just didn't, I wasn't strong enough. I'm like, dude, no, I was solid in the church and in my testimony. And to me, it was kind of the seeds of doubt that start once you start critically thinking, like you were saying. You start questioning, oh, well, why is it like this? What is it like this? And the basic answers of, oh, you just need to pray more and have faith, don't really cut it. And you start to realize that other people aren't necessarily critically thinking like you are. They're not digging deep. And the surface level is good enough for them. And that's kind of where it starts, when you start to realize, hey, I think different than these people. And
you're the minority, and you're like, oh, I always thought I was the majority. Like, I thought this is how people think in the church. And like, no one else thinks like this.
No one else thinks like this. So I think that's really cool that you use this magazine as like the fusion of your talent as a designer, but also as, this journaling therapy process almost. It sounds like.
I think it's also like, I also started it as like, I wanted to create, I'm really big on habits, right? Like, I think that's like, people that are successful they create habits that allow them to create the outcome that they're looking for, to generate the life that they want to live.
Yeah.
And so when I looked at it as like, this became a laboratory for me to learn how to create a product, how to design something, how to do a physical product, and at the same time do it in a way that I can make money. And I wanted it to have, like the Tom Shoes idea that part of doing this helps other people, was really like all those things. And it was all about like learning skills, knowing that what I'm doing now will be, I'll be able to execute on what I really want to do 20 years from now. And I don't think people think this way, but it was like, I committed to doing this magazine because I wanted the process itself, one, was enjoyable, and two, I wanted to create the skill set I needed to be able to execute the ideas that I wanted. And I think too, another big part, like why it's a physical magazine, is I had spent, at this point, 5 years doing digital stuff, living in the digital world. And I love the tactile feel of holding your work in your hand and wanting to completely step away from
you being into that, even before, like you were doing like stamps and like printing press stuff.
Yeah. I built my own letterpress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's Mark being Mark, I guess.
Yeah, I just yeah. I was going off on a tangent. I had something else I was going to tell you, but when you were talking about like being dedicated, like I dedicated 2 years of my life where I said, I will not talk to my family except for on Mother's Day and Christmas. Like, you don't do that. At least me, I don't do that.
Yeah.
On a whim, on like, sure, I'll just like put myself in this really crazy situation, even though I don't believe it. Like,
yeah,
I was completely in it.
Strangers, pour your heart out.
Yeah.
To strangers.
Yeah.
Every
day, like every
wake
single
up at 6:30, read the scriptures.
Yeah,
man. I believed it, and it's interesting because it still is a part of, I feel like, who I am. I don't know if it's still a part of you. I'm not one of those people who I like hate the church now and I have this vendetta. To me, it's just I needed to go on a different path, and I am still grateful for my mom, who's still a member, and I'm still grateful for kind of the framework of I still am who I am. I still have this framework that I think the church gave me, but I've just evolved it. And it's like you were saying before that, you can't pick and choose the pieces. Like you can absolutely pick and choose the pieces, and it just requires a little bit more thinking, because no one's going to tell you what those pieces should be. And so yeah, it's been like this evolution, and I don't know.
Yeah, I totally get it. I don't know how far you're removed from it. For me, it was 2015. So I feel like the first. I mean, it took 3 years before I even wrote about it. It was 2 years in before I told my parents.
Really?
It was I didn't talk about it. I didn't publicly speak. I didn't say anything about it, and I still don't like. It's not. It's a part of my.
One thing I was surprised. I remember saying way long ago, you posted about coffee, and I think you were doing some photography of this coffee pot or something. I can't remember what it was, and I was like, "Oh."
I did that video of the.
Not here anymore. And I think that was the first thing I remember, but I was like, wow, like, that's brave of you, because at the same time, I was also, I think drinking coffee, and I was also having doubts. I'm kind of researching a little more about Joseph Smith and some of this stuff. I felt like as I researched the church and I researched anti-Mormon, whatever, I realized that it's not so much anti-Mormon as it is just history. And anything that the church kind of whitewashes history a lot. And that's what they give you in the official church manuals. But if you look past that, it's not anti-Mormon, it's just what actually happens. And it's just some of the details that they omitted and some of the stuff that doesn't look as clean.
Yeah.
And I started, why did I bring that up? But
we were talking about coffee.
We're talking about coffee, right. So anyways, as I was having these doubts and I was researching the church, but I was still hiding. And a large part I kind of still do in a way. I'm still kind of like, because church for me is still about the community as much as it is the doctrine. And I was kind of, I didn't want to lose my community. And so I was kind of like, oh wow, Mark's here just putting it out there, which I thought was cool because you were just kind of embracing it, whereas I was hiding it. I was drinking coffee, but I didn't let anybody know. Like,
yeah.
It's like
the evolution you go through. Yeah.
It's like
by the time I was posting that, I didn't even think twice about it because it's not really a big deal to me, by that time, because I had several years to like process internally, like once I figure things out, I really don't care what the other people are saying. Like and that's been like, I think one of my best things from when I was young is having that ability. I think that's one of the hardest things for people is to push off outside opinions and to not take it on and feel anything for it. I think that's really, really difficult, but I'm glad that you say that though. I hope that helps.
I remember that. It's like, wow, Mark's just going out there and like, no shame. How was that transition for you? Did you feel like, obviously kind of doubting the doctrine is something you can do on your own time and is a process of study and research.
No,
but,
that's
the community. How do you deal with that?
So I think that's a really important part. And because I think the idea, I think the notion or the narrative that we have is that you turn bad and you're a different person and all this. And I think the process actually evolved me to be a better person. But I think the process is important because when you look at it, it was the whole time that I was a seminary teacher that the whole way that I actually approached
which is so
teaching
funny.
Seminary. I was approaching seminary. I was like, this is how I wish people would have. This is how I wish they would have taught me seminary. Yeah. I didn't bear testament. I didn't say this is what you believe. I presented information, and then I was like, what do you guys think? Because remember, when you graduate in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, in 4 years you'll be out. You'll be on your own, and you'll have to make these decisions. Don't wait to decide how you want to live it. Do it now when you can talk to the bishop, when you can talk to your parents, when you can talk to your brother, talk to your sister. Like, there's no hiding in asking questions and trying to figure it out, because at some point you will leave, you will be on your own. And at that point, that could either be scary or it's been something you've always been doing. Wow. And so having something that I've always done, like I came in, I didn't ever say like, and I know the church is true, even though I was like believing, it was always like, it doesn't matter if I believe it. What matters is what you believe. And even inside of the church, what pieces and how you believe them is you. And so that to me was like, let's have a discussion. That sometimes there's not like it's good or it's bad. Sometimes it's like, that's interesting, right? Like I remember talking about how Joseph Smith had multiple versions of his story. And I didn't come in and say like, this is what it should be. It's like, hey, there's 4 accounts. How does that make you feel? And a lot of people were like, well, that seems not right. Like we've only been told there was one. It's like, yeah, Now we have to deal with this new information, right? Like that's an evolution of mental shift that I think we as humans need to do. I think there's a lot of people that graduate high school and never mentally graduate high school. They're stuck in that frame of mind. And that to me is what the switch was coming out of religion, is that it's a framework that I think works for people. But when you start to see things and want to evolve your mental state, for me, it didn't carry over. But it's important to talk about this because so I was teaching seminary throughout the whole process. What's that?
San Antonio?
Yeah.
Okay.
Throughout the whole process, like these things are coming up and I'm like questioning. At the same time, my wife at the time, who was going through her own process and was starting to question stuff, and we started to have dialogue and conversation. And when she first brought it up, I already knew it, but it was like so shocking. It was never a possibility in my mind that the church wasn't true. And the moment that it was like, it was so jarring. But we went on, still teaching seminary.
Did you see the punch, or were you already having those thoughts?
I was already having those thoughts, and she was too. Is the moment that she verbalized them, that it made it. I didn't realize, I was subconscious for me. I had already been like for years been struggling with it, but not realizing what I was struggling with. I knew there was some strife, but I couldn't articulate it until she did. And then it was like, oh, and even when she did, it was like, whoa, this is scary. I don't know how to deal with this. And it took time. Like I was still teaching seminary. She had a calling. And throughout the process, we're like, like talking to each other. And then it got to the point where we're like talking with the bishop and we're like, I don't know how to deal with this information. And it was always just like, it wasn't any, like they were great. It's nothing on their side. It's just the answer is always like, well, just live it. And so they started inviting us to talk with area authorities and, people that were in the Quorum of the 70 and like higher ups. My wife at the time actually ended up talking with the church historian and having like a really good conversation. But it was always just like this, we're not sure how to deal with it. It's not like, hey, we hate this stuff, we want to leave. It's like, hey, how do we deal with it? And we're talking with our bishop, we're fasting and praying. Like it's multiple years of trying to figure this stuff out. And going back to what you were saying, one of the area authorities was like, we should have never called it anti-Mormon literature. We should have called it Mormon history. And he openly said it.
Yes.
And exactly what you were saying. So it's, and the church historian was like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we tried to talk around. And it didn't do any good. It wasn't helpful. It caused a lot of harm. And that's why you see a lot of the shift in, they're talking a lot more about it. And I think that's good for people that want to stay in. I think that's a positive thing. But that's one thing that people don't realize is this was over a year of us like, and even when we had decided, I was like, well, there's still 2 more months left in the school year. And I'm like, we both did our calling all the way up to the end. And I wasn't trying to get anybody to leave. It wasn't angry. It was just like, but I think the thing that's different between you and I is like, I didn't have a community. I didn't connect with anybody. And so to leave was like, these people aren't really my friend. They talk to me because it's an assignment. And I'm not negative on anybody. It was just like, there was nobody that I jived with. There was nobody like you and me. Like there was nobody that I still, like there's one person that I still talk to. Who was like a really cool guy and super, non-judgmental, and is like, I don't care. Like you're a good person. Like it doesn't matter. It's always a weird thing. What's that?
Can I name drop people that we used to know? Or should I not?
Okay, whatever you want to do.
What about Colin?
That was an interesting situation.
Because he was strong. Remember, you looked up to him. You used to tell me like, "Oh, he listens to the church podcasts every day on his way," and I want to do that too. And I remember that, like, "Oh wow, Mark's really strong."
Well, I did that
Because Colin was
starting
like,
on my mission. That's the interesting thing. I did that all through like my mission and all through college. I would listen to church talks, like old BYU talks and BYU Idaho talks, and a lot of that stuff. I was really into that. I think it's actually part of how I do my storytelling comes from listening to great speeches from religious leaders. It's a lot of, anyways, that's a side note.
Sorry. Okay. Battery.
But yeah, that was a really interesting. I still think Colin's a really great person. I still talk with Wayne. Talk with Tony.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah. It was interesting. Colin, how so?
Yeah, because like I'm going through this transition, and to me, it's just like when you leave your mission, a lot of people are like, "Oh man, it's back to real life, and you won't ever feel the spirit as strong." And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Do you think any of the apostles or prophets were like, "Oh, if I only felt the spirit like when I was on my mission"? It doesn't make any sense. As a human, like you evolve, you're getting better. Why would I feel the spirit less because I'm not serving as a missionary?
Yeah.
And so there's this concept of like so to me, I was just continuing the evolution that I've had in life. And Colin, I really admire him for the fact that he's one of the only people, maybe the only person that came out and talked to me about it and had conversations. He was like, the light in your eyes is gone. And I was like, well, that's interesting because my life has actually never been better. Like I shed a whole ton of baggage. And so he's like, wow, talk to me about that. And so we had a really good conversation. But the way that he approached it was like the light in your eyes has gone. And maybe it has, like, I don't know. All I know is that I feel like I'm really not any different than before. I'm a better person. I've found a way to live my life that I feel so content with where I'm at and who I am that like this is what the reason I push intentional living is because that's the only way that I've found to really get to a point where you can live on your terms. Like you are making your decisions, and it's a powerful. Like, there's nothing else. I realized there was this moment when I was going to therapy when I vocalized, when I said, "There's nothing else I need. No bonus, no purchase that I make, no house, no other child, no other partner. Nothing will ever bring me more contentment than I have with just being me. That I get to get up every day and do the stuff that I love." Wow. Like to get to that point, I feel like that's what people are striving for. It's just like the fact that I realize I have today, I think is really powerful. Another thing that I wanted to circle back to is when I was explaining this to my mom, is she was just saying, it's like not understanding. And I tried to explain it this way. I said, when Nephi cut off Laban's head to go get the gold plates, anybody else would have walked in on him. Any other member of the church would walk in on someone doing that, and they'd be like, this dude just murdered this guy and stole his stuff. But we have context of the fact that he spoke with an angel that told him to kill Laban so that generations would be able to have these scriptures. That personal revelation that he had, that any of us would look at that situation and go, that's wrong. That's what's happening to me. And I don't think she got it. But that context, I think, is like the power. It's like when you talk about personal revelation, it doesn't make sense to anybody on the outside, but like the same thing that led me to go on a mission and to be a member, that same feeling, call it God, call it karma, call it the universe. I don't really care. I know what that feeling is. I know how to operate based on it and how to take action from it. And I think that's the core power that you need. And so those are the pieces that I don't think people talk about this. I haven't really talked about it in this detail ever before. But I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. I mean, that's part of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because I was like, dude, I think we're kind of going through similar things. Obviously, you had a wife and you have kids, and we're not exactly on the same page of life, but very few people, I think, that I've talked to, I haven't tried to reach out as much to groups that could help me find different communities. And so it's helpful for me to talk with you and hear what your journey is.
Yeah.
But that's cool. That's powerful, because we're all out here trying to find our own way. And yeah, so for me, I did have that community. It is interesting out here in LA. It's definitely different than San Antonio. You weren't part of the singles board, man. You missed out.
Yeah.
You got young.
I know.
The singles board in San Antonio was great, man. People were friendly. People were nice. People were inclusive. I moved out to LA, and I can't say the same thing out here, man. It's Hollywood, man. People are beautiful, and they're trying to hustle and get their acting, their screenplay writing careers. And if you can't add to that in some way, dude, as an iOS developer, nobody knew how to talk with me. Like, they're like, what the hell do you do? Oh, you work for Apple? No, I don't work for Apple. I'm an Apple developer, an iOS developer. They're like, okay. And then, it's like, if you can't, I just didn't 100% fit in here. Like I felt like I did in San Antonio, where you have that USA, that community. And so it was tough, but over time I did build that friendship. But at the same time, I was falling away from the church, and my brothers were showing me this different path. And so, and it's been a struggle to say, hey, how can I still keep this part of my life that I enjoy, but move on and evolve it, and start critically thinking for my own, how I want to live and how I want to enjoy life, but not losing my friends.
Yeah.
And that can be tough, and something that I've had to struggle with. I think the thing you find, though, is like your real friends will stay with you. Your real friends aren't going to judge you, and your real friends are going to, if they were going to judge you and not be your friend, they probably weren't your real friend in the first place.
Yeah.
Because of you decide to start drinking, and so it's been a process. But I think I found, like what you said about living intentionally. Like, I've never used those words, but I think that's like the same thing that I've had to find is, if it doesn't bring you joy, then why are you doing it? And I think that was the final straw, because doctrinally, I think a while ago, I figured out, hey, the church's doctrine is kind of made up by some dude. That he was really smart, and he was a genius, dude. Like, you got to give it to him. Like, he really, if you don't believe, like, you got to at least give him that he figured some stuff out and he had some good ideas.
For sure.
But,
hang on. Hey, Google, turn on the living room lights. It's getting super dark in here. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So figuring out that, like, hey, the doctrine didn't work as much for me, but I still have this community. And so, yeah, where was I going? But I think figuring out that, where I was going is, I started to realize that even parts of the community I wasn't really jiving. And like how I said, a lot of people there, if you can't help them in their career or help them in their life, or if they don't think you're cool enough or in enough, then you're just kind of on the outside. I was like, dude, this is supposed to be my community, my family, and they're making me feel like an outcast. They're making
Yeah.
me feel like I don't belong here. And I realized, hey, if this isn't bringing me joy, this is bringing me this sort of anxiety because I'm trying to fit in every week. And I had to, realize that if it's not bringing you joy, then it's not worth your time. And that's when I really stepped away, both doctrinally and from the community, and stuck with a few friends, but that was a process. And that's something that I've tried to do since then, is do things that bring you joy and live life intentionally, as you were saying. Find those things. So how do you find those things that bring you joy? Identifying those things and trying to invite those in your life. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Pausing for a minute to jump in, because one of the things with the volume 32, the article that I put out on my journey leaving Mormonism, is I wrote the article, and then I was showing a friend, and they were like, well, that's really great, but like, what are the doctrinal reasons? And so like I go through and I just basically like list out like all the things that were troubling to me. And I think that was like, I think it's what was happening is like there were things that were pulled into question, and then you just learn to be like, well, if you look at one individual thing, you're like, well, I'll just put that there. I don't agree with it, but I like the community. I like most of everything else. And what happened is I was getting to the point where it was like, especially going through Doctrine and Covenants, I was realizing so many things. And by the time, so the things that really stuck out that were really hard for me, finding out that there was another book, the Book of the Hebrews, that Joseph Smith got before the Book of Mormon. It was published 5 years before the Book of Mormon, that from someone else that was Oliver Cowdery, brought it. And so anyways, it was like, there was another book that had everything that's in the Book of Mormon was in there. It was the real way that
I'm curious about this, but I don't know the details like you're telling me. Keep going.
Oh, yeah. So the other things that were really disturbing was the polygamy.
Did you also hear, because I heard a theory, sorry, back on that previous point, I heard a theory that Sidney, what was his name?
Rigdon?
Sidney Rigdon was a Baptist and a preacher, and that he collaborated with Joseph Smith possibly to turn it into what became the Book of Mormon, where the Book of Hebrews was more of a story about the Native Americans, and whereas the Book of Mormon was that same story but injected with doctrine. And that was, and there's a theory that Sidney Rigdon, he was a Baptist preacher, and he had a lot more experience with doctrine and with Bible, and he kind of helped create that version. That's one of the stories that I've heard. So I don't know, but it's interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things that was really beneficial was, I don't know if you've seen this, but there was a podcast called Mormon Stories. It's essentially like interviews of people like you and I that were devout members and that shared their experience leaving. And one of them was a guy who wrote a letter that is the, what's the name of it now? I just blanked on it.
From Mormon Stories?
The CES letters. So he sent it to the person that was head of the CES department in the church, and was just basically like outlined all the things, all the discrepancies that he had. And he was an honest seeker, like, help me understand these things. And he goes through line by line, and it was like all of them that were just really interesting. That's where I learned about the fact that there was another book, that it was tied to Oliver Cowdery, that there was so many people that were there financially tied to the Book of Mormon being a success, that are the witnesses. And so the interesting things around that. I think one of the really difficult things was like I had mentioned, like some of the revelations just being like, that sounds like he needed money, and there was a revelation that this should happen. As a founder, like you're using this tool to be able to help convince people for your, and I don't think it was like a negative thing. Like I think that he really could have believed that he was building God's kingdom. There was many other organizations that started at the same time. Like there was an upheaval in the community of spirituality, and I think that he just happened to be in the time when that was happening. But some of the other ones were like, I think one of the really difficult things was finding out that polygamy wasn't widely known. It was a secret thing that Joseph Smith, and the first person that he did it with was a maid in his house who was 16. And at the time he's, I think, 32. Like, yeah. And so this was at a time when I'm like, I'm 30. And like, you putting that in perspective, it's like, all right, so I have so some of those things started to like not jive. And then you realize like the extent. And then it was the part when it was, he sent people on missions and married their wife or had children with the wife.
Yeah.
And then, like there was all these things that it's like, and I, was trying to like bring these up and talk in Elders Quorum, but nobody wanted to have a serious debate or discussion. Not even a debate. It was just like, hey, what do we do with these?
Yeah.
Like this information, like it's not as pretty as we thought. Nobody wants to go into the details. And when you do, it's like, well, don't look off into the branches, stay at the base. And it was like, no, but this is the base. Like this is part of like a fundamental doctrine that we talk about. And the fact that he received revelation that an angel drew their sword that he should do this, like that's heavy. And we're not gonna, it's not the branches, like this is the core.
And it's like how members and apostles will say you can't pick up parts of the branches, you have to pick up the whole stick. Well, why doesn't that apply to church history? Why can you pick and choose the pieces that are appealing and are easy to believe, and you can ignore these other parts? Like, why is that okay?
Yeah. And then it got into like, when you realize he was tarred and feathered because people in the community found out that he was marrying other wives. And the tradition is like, it was he was being tarred and feathered because they were opposing God's will. No, people were finding out. Nobody knew about, like, people don't realize Joseph Smith was not talking publicly about this. People were finding out. That's why he was tarred and feathered. And you know what? They were going to print an article in the paper about what he was doing. And that's why he had a mob destroy the printing press. Joseph Smith hired a mob, destroy the printing press. That is what actually took him to Carthage jail. That ended up to his death.
And that was one of the main reasons I left. That was one of the main reasons. But
it was to cover up polygamy. He did not want that to get out yet. It wasn't until 1852 when Brigham Young, and I'll tell you this, Joseph Smith was the founder. Everything about the church, I think the narrative we have comes out of Brigham Young. He led the church through that whole period. I think Joseph Smith was like the radical, starter, startup guy. And then he enterprised it. Like he came in and built the foundation of what we have today, including, and that was the other thing, like knowing that Joseph Smith gave the priesthood to women and Black people. And then Brigham Young was like openly racist and took it away. And
I didn't know women had it. I didn't know women had it. That's interesting.
Yep. There were several women that he gave the priesthood to as well. And they didn't get it taken away, but it was deemed by Brigham Young that would not continue forward. So it was like, there was these conflicts, and there's a bunch of other stuff but some of these were like really, and it goes back to what I was saying, is like when you look at one individually, or even looking at the way that he viewed the Godhead, that
Yes.
the very first publishment of the Book of Mormon, he didn't understand God the Father. They weren't three separate beings. They were one, and that's explained. And then you have the alterations of the Book of Mormon that change as his perceptions change. I think that was really hard. And then learning the fact that the whole priesthood wasn't even in the beginning. We talk about it as if like that was part of the foundation before the church even started. It came years after, and then we wrote it back into the narrative. And that was just like, okay. And I think that's what took me out of religion in general. But I was like, if this can only be around for 200 years and it had been shaped, twisted so much, then I'm sure Jesus existed. I think the stories have been blown out. They were written 80 years or 60 years after he lived. This wasn't, it's not firsthand accounts. It's years after. Like, there's so many things where I'm like, but again, if other people want to believe it, if it's a framework that helps them, I'm happy for them. It just wasn't for me. And these things, I think it's important to talk about them, because people would be like, you just don't know the doctrine, or you weren't strong enough. And that's just not my story. It's not most stories of people that I talk to.
Yeah, exactly. I talked to one guy in my church. He was the bishop's counselor, and really charismatic, easy to talk to guy. And he's like, yeah, let's come over and we'll talk about it. And he was like, well, what are your issues with the church? And he was like, well, is it polygamy? Is it that, black people couldn't have the priesthood? And he was ready to talk about these kind of like prepackaged subjects that I think a lot of people have questions about. But then I started hitting him with like the heavy stuff, like Joseph Smith, early history into like mysticism and his different startups, like you were saying, the printing press thing and how he actually got sent to Carthage jail.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And how we were taught that it was this mob. No, dude, it was like he just ordered the printing press to be destroyed because he didn't want the truth to get out.
Right.
Another one that I thought was interesting, the mob that came and attacked them in Missouri, I believe. We just thought, it was, Satan got into the hearts of they were wild Westerners and they had no law. They were lawless people. Like, okay, maybe they're a bunch of redneck cowboys. But another part of the truth they don't tell us is that Joseph was prophesizing that that this was God's chosen land and they were the chosen people, and that he was going to take this land back by force. How would you feel if a cult came into your neighborhood and said that they were going to take over? It puts it into a different perspective. You're going to be like, who are you? No, you're not. So Joseph Smith was publicly saying these things about his prophecies that he was going to take over this land. So it puts things in a different light. And then the other thing that I think did it for me was I started researching a lot of the apostles and why so many of them left the church. They became, what's that word? When Joseph Smith outcast somebody from the church?
Excommunicated?
Excommunicated. Why did so many of these apostles who had these firsthand accounts, why did they end up leaving the church or become excommunicated? And one I read was, I think, is David Whitmer, who was one of the first apostles. And he wrote this letter about how he thought Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet, that at one point he maybe saw God, but he had fallen from grace. And he wrote something that I thought was so interesting. He said that there was a time when they needed money. So they sent him and another man to Canada to sell the Book of Mormon. And they were trying to get this contract. I think this is in Doctrine and Covenants, where they go to Canada and they're trying to sell this contract for the Book of Mormon. And Joseph Smith has a prophecy that, hey, Revelation, if you go to Canada, you will sell this book. And God tells him in this prophecy that you will sell it. And Canada is where it will happen, and send these two missionaries. Well, they go. They're not able to sell it. and they come back, and he asks Joseph, what happened? I thought you had a vision or a prophecy from God. Why did this not work out if this is from God? And Joseph Smith said to them, sometimes revelations are from God, other times they're from man, and then other times they're from the devil. And
this is definitely not in the Doctrine and Covenants, by the way.
this is not about covenants. Not about covenants. This is just, I thought, was a fascinating story from someone who was very close to Joseph Smith. That
like
really
he started this off as like, I think this might be part of the doctrine.
Wasn't it like he sent them to Canada for something? Like there's a revelation where he sends missionaries. I don't know. I haven't read Doctrine and Covenants in a while, but he is sending missionaries all over the place to do certain stuff, to try to make money.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. Yeah, there's things like that where he has other people buy land. Sending people on mission. Yeah, so it's fair enough, but it's funny.
Anyway,
no way is that canonized.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. But I just thought that was interesting because it just shows that even Joseph Smith had this interesting relationship with God and had this interesting relationship that the church doesn't really talk about. The church, if you do believe in God, the way Joseph Smith interacted with them was very different than the way that the church teaches us about God. That he's always watching us, that he has our whole lives planned out, that that he'll answer every prayer and tell you exactly what to do, and everything he tells you to do is going to be exactly because it's of God. And that's even for Joseph Smith, that wasn't the case. And it just made me start thinking differently about God, about how who Joseph Smith was, what these revelations were. And I just started kind of evolving my own kind of opinions from there on. Yeah, because look at all the revelations. Like, were they really from God, or were they because he was using them as a tool, as you said, to kind of get what he needed out of people?
And I think that was like, again, when I was having the conversation with my mom, that was like the distinction. Is she was like, well, men aren't perfect. And I was like, yes, but he's saying in the name of God that this was a revelation to do this. Like, for instance, like the polygamy thing was really like, that was like, he claimed that was from God. And I just think it was wrong. I don't agree with it. And so that I don't agree with a lot of the other ones. Like, but she's like, well, he's just a man. He's like, no, but he's acting. He's saying, this is, thus saith the Lord. Like, right. It's not that he got things wrong. It's that he was acting in the name of God.
You're not agreeing against Joseph Smith, the man. You're disagreeing against God. And so there's no room for dissent in the Mormon church.
Yeah. I just thought it was difficult because she's like, well, he's not perfect. And I'm like, I'm not talking about like the offhanded comment he made, to a reporter. I'm talking about the comments he made over the pulpit about, this is what the church is said by God to do. Like, those things I have issue with. And she's like, well, yeah, then that makes sense that you would want to, leave. Like, I fundamentally just disagree with a lot of it. Again, it's not, I think we're on the same page. Like, I'm not trying to get anyone away from it. Like, if it works for a lot of my brothers and sisters, like, they've improved their lives tremendously through it. Like, why would I want you to stop that? Like, I don't care. Like, your life is your life. My life is mine. And whatever helps you doesn't necessarily help me. Yeah. And I don't want to stop you from growing. And if that helps you, then go do it. It wasn't a framework for me.
Yeah. So it sounds like they left the church for very different reasons than you did.
Yeah. Well, they didn't know what they believed, right? They just didn't want to, it was, we were told we needed to go to church. And so now that they're on their own, they're like, well, I'm going to find out what I believe. And that was their path. I wasn't ever told I have to go to church. I went to church because I liked church. But once I started like mentally evolving and having my own thought, it was like, I don't think I jive with this place. So it's definitely a very different experience, but theirs was theirs, mine is mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of saw that because I told you my dad's not a member, but my mom was raised in Salt Lake, Utah, but she married my dad during years where she wasn't a member. And she was inactive for I think like a period of about, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And so when now, her sons started to become inactive, it's interesting talking with her because she left the church for very different reasons than we did. Hers was more, like you said, like discovering her path. She was just.
I wasn't questioning the church.
Yeah. She never questioned the church.
Yeah, that's how my brothers and sisters talked about.
Yeah. They just
didn't want to live it.
Church. She just didn't want to live it.
Yep.
Whereas with my brothers, it was very different. Like, I loved the church. I wanted to go to the church. But it was the doctrine, the kind of doubts in the doctrine that kind of came first for me. So it was a very different path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of similarities between you and I.
Yeah. That's so weird. That's funny.
Yeah. Okay. I should at least turn this off. I think that was a good conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We'll end it there. All right, round two. I did want to talk about therapy because the thing about therapy is, like, growing up, there was this notion that it was for disturbed people that had problems. And then you grow up and you realize that everyone has fucking problems. Like, it's bullshit to think that you don't and that you don't need it. It's like mental health is just as important as physical health, as sexual health, as emotional health. Like, it is something that we have not talked about. And it has helped me to be able to process the death of the lives that won't be because of the changes from leaving religion to, going through divorce and leaving that life, but still having a relationship with that person that's still really good. And the best thing about it is that, and actually this is why I'm on a really big trip these days of wanting to get a business coach, and I actually want to say business therapist, because the way therapy worked for me is there was nothing that a good therapist isn't telling me what to do, isn't giving me anything. It's helping me navigate me. I've got stuff going on. I got shit going on that's keeping me from where I want to go. And over the last 6 years, 5 years that I've been going to therapy, it's helped me navigate myself and pull these things out. I had instances when I was a kid that I was exposed to stuff that I had PTSD. I had no idea, but it was causing me like physical reactions in my life that I thought was just like, oh, that's just one of the things I have to deal with. And realize that there's this therapy that you could do, this rapid eye movement therapy, that actually heals you. That actually it's you. Like when you go to sleep is when your mind is saving stuff into long-term memory. And what happens is you have traumatic experiences that gets locked. And the only way to uncover that is to pull it out, address it, and then do this rapid eye movement that now once you're talking about it, you're older and you're navigating it. And then you start saving those new emotions of like, well, how did that make you feel? It's like, well, yeah, I get why I was upset about it. I didn't even know. And as you're handling it and healing, you're actually saving that healing back in. So it's like, I grew up with a great family, loving parents. Like there's zero reason that I would ever think that I had PTSD. But yet going through this, it was like, it really did. These triggers would happen that were, from these experiences that I had, that I was,
it was uncovered
5 and 6. What's that?
It was uncovered in therapy. Like you didn't know
She was.
about it until you went to therapy?
I went to therapy and having conversations. She's like, I think you might have PTSD. I'm like, what? Okay, I just got to therapy. Like to get that, I thought crazy people had to be going to therapy. I realized that it's good for everybody. And now, like in session 2, she's like, I think you have PTSD. I'm like, no. Now, people with PTSD like have been to war. They've seen horrific things. Like I had a great childhood. How can that be?
Yeah.
But it just turns out that I think a lot of people have things that we think that are ours to deal with, are part of our, our habits in life. And I think it might be tied, at least for me, these things that I thought were part of me
Wow.
were actually baggage from when I was 5 and 6 years old, being exposed to traumatic things that I had never even realized I was. I had never talked about with anybody, and so yeah, it was very interesting. But it's all about navigating yourself and healing on a level. Like what I was saying, that's when I got to the level when I said, there's nothing else in life that I need. No app, no phone, no technology, no shoe, no anything, no partner, no car, no house, nothing that would allow me to be happier than just who I am.
Yeah.
Content with what I have right now. I don't need a bonus. I don't need any, like, to get to that point is holy cow. And then to have this thing where it's like, for the rest of my life, I really want to be doing this, live life intentionally. Everything I do generates out of that concept. And it's like, I want to be 90 years old and passing and like recording, this is how a human passes, like and then have someone upload it after I'm gone. Like that's how I see my life, is like the fact that like somebody lived 200, 500, 600 years ago, however long ago, wrote things down. I've read and have been a better person because of it. That was the only way they had to communicate to me through the generations. I have written word, I have audio, I have video, and we're evolving more technologies. Like I have my health data. At some point, I'll be able to tell a story with like the data that I have around me and be able to map a story around that I couldn't have, maybe 10 years from now I'll be able to do that I couldn't have today. That will affect people in the future. Maybe my grandchildren, maybe people I don't even know. And that's the level that I think is really interesting, is that if they had these mediums to communicate with the future, what would they say? Right? That's where this all comes from. If we had, part of, like, I was just talking with another friend today about the reason doing this podcast, this show, Evolution of One, is my journey evolving as a human with the after effects of the Black Lives Matter and the COVID. What would it have been like to have real hand accounts of people having conversations about 9/11, about stuff that's happening, right? And something that's here, about JFK, about the assassination of Lincoln, right? Having conversations and us as humans evolving and trying to be better because of what's happening, and talking about the inequalities and the struggles, just like we're talking about with leaving religion and a lot of the baggage that we had. Having those open dialogue, I think, is very powerful. So yes, I would encourage everyone at whatever age you're at to go to therapy to help.
Yeah.
That was my rant. I was super excited about it.
You went on that. No, that's cool. I mean, therapy is something I want to do because I've heard so many people have so many good experiences, and I've always thought like you, like, oh, there's nothing that wrong with me. I just deal with it. But the more I talk with people, the more I'm like, yeah, maybe there is a lot of shit wrong with me. There's shit wrong with everybody. And that's cool that you've had. So do you go? How often do you go?
I haven't been in a while, but I go. Depends on, like, at moments when things get really tough. Like when I was going through the church, leaving Mormonism, that was like a period of like 2 years, I want to say. I was meeting every week, sometimes twice a week, when I was doing the testing, the rapid eye movement, like the PTSD stuff.
Yeah.
That was like meeting pretty frequently, but then it was like every 2 weeks, every month, a lot of times.
So it's
I
kind
haven't
of
seen
play
it,
it by
it,
ear, you call them.
yeah,
So,
it's like when things happened and went down and like, you know, it separated in our marriage. Like I was having, yeah, she was like, call me at any point that you're struggling. So like sometimes it was 2 or 3 times a week. Cause that was like, man, you talk about leaving religion, like having a marriage fail and like that. I'm not going to get into it. Like, but like that threw me into a whirlwind. Yeah, all of volume 33, if anybody who's gone through a loss of a loved one or a divorce or anything, the whole thing is my journey of accepting like all of it. It's like I talk about like I in one article specifically that cheeks out is like I had this moment where I was actually having a conversation with myself and I wrote it in a way that I was actually writing both sides. And I'd be like, you know, like, what's wrong with you? You failed, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd be like, dude, you know, like you guys are navigating a really tough situation and she's a really great person, you know? And so I was like going back and forth and like, that's the reality of like what goes on is like, it's not, it's such a roller coaster. The same thing when, you know, I think religion, that moral foundation that you have is the same thing. There's so many things inside of it. But that stuff was super raw. Writing it in the moment and publishing it was probably the scariest thing that I've put out because it's so vulnerable.
Wow.
But it's, I feel like, again, like if you've experienced the loss of a child or a loved one, there's so many similarities from what I experienced because it was the death of a life that will never be. And so yeah, therapy is important.
Yeah, or I mean, I talk about losing in community, but I mean, your wife was your community. That community in a way.
And we still are, like we're working, we're navigating life together. We have 3 kids. Like I don't know. It's a beautiful, weird evolution that I'll talk more about. You know, we can have another conversation.
Yeah.
Another time. It's definitely too close to what's going on right now, but there's a beauty to you don't have to hate the person. And I think there's this narrative that divorce is this ugly, nasty thing. And for me, I'm of the mentality that like, I always want to give more than I've received. And when in a moment when everyone's telling me, you know, you have to worry about yourself, you have to do blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, I'm a male with a technical degree who's been in a technical field for the last decade. Like the system's built around me. I'm going to be fine. I'll be all right. I want to make sure that I give far more because if she fails, my kids fail, right? Like this is someone that I care for. Like the love doesn't stop. It's this amazing, it's love. Like to be able to look at someone and say like, even though it's not me, I want you to succeed and live that. Man, fuck, that's the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. Yeah. That to me is love, is to have the situation and to not get ugly and to not let the situation get to a place where you let anger and hatred rule your actions when you are acting out of kindness and love for the other person because you genuinely want them to succeed, even if it's not with you. I think there's something that I want to talk more on it, but it's like, I'm in it right now. It's too much, but sorry, sure. Kind of got real heavy this last part. Super heavy.
Yeah, no, powerful words. I really understand.